You know, one of the greatest problems between the white and black, the racial problems in our country, is most white people, the only thing they know about black people is what they see on TV. We're on television. Just, you want to talk about racism? Then go to the liberal media. Every time you see a television program, usually it's a black guy trying to rape somebody's white daughter or selling drugs in the hood. I mean, just look at that. That's what, most people are scared. Most white people are scared to death of black people because the only black people they've ever seen are on TV. And vice versa. Most black people think every white person is a racist. Because usually when a white person is put in that context, he's some Ku Klux Klan guy from Alabama. And when you actually get to know an African American person, you go, whoa, he's a human being. It's the same way with your enemy. Distance and lack of communication will just tear you apart. Also, you have to deprogram them with regard to the lies they've heard. Well, if a person believes this, it means they believe this and this and this, when it's not true. I mean, I hear people stand up and speak against sovereign grace, and I think to myself, if that's what sovereign grace was, I wouldn't believe in it either. So you have to get to know them and love them and care for them and live with them and earn the right to go in there. Earn the right. Now I'm going to say one other thing, and you've got to be very careful here. It's a balance. You cannot be reactionary in the ministry. You cannot do things all the time or say things all the time just because of your thinking of the reaction or the interpretation of your hearers. At the same time, you need to take that in consideration. We need to be as innocent as doves. We need to be as wise as serpents. If I go into a place where I know that the people, for example, they hear about sovereign grace and they think it means all sorts of things that it doesn't mean. Well, I'm not going to go in there and play to the devil's hand, throwing around sovereign grace or Calvinism or this or that, because what they think it means, I don't believe. I'm going to go in there, for example, I know a guy that had asked a bunch of different preachers to come preach in his church. And literally they were all, when they went in there, they were wrong. It seemed to me that each preacher went in there with this Martin Luther reformed, I'm going to reform you, preached for 2 or 3 days, angry, mad, told everybody they're sinners, it's not even a church and everything else, and then left. And so I was the next preacher to come. And they really thought, okay, here comes the Godzilla of all mean preachers. So I got in there, and for the 2 times I preached on the unconditional love of God and begged men to come to Christ. Whosoever will. And all the enemies of that pastor who had all this ammunition against him, they were just waiting for me to come so that they would get the final killing bullet out of me to put that pastor out of that church. And I knew that. No one told me that. It's just years of experience. I knew exactly what was going on. And so I went in there and did exactly the opposite of what they expected, and it deflated the entire situation. You see what I'm saying? You have to use wisdom. Knowing what your enemies expect, knowing what they're going to use against you, and not playing into their hands. Now, not being deceitful, but at the same time, showing them who you really are. I thought it was amazing that Ravenhill, when he preached, sometimes it could be terrifying. But when you went up to talk to him, he was like the warmest fella. It just threw you off. You found out who he really was. Man, this isn't just some mean guy mad at the world. It's a very loving man. That's what they've got to see in you. When I mean self-validating, I do not mean that you validate self. I'm not using it as yourself, himself, herself, but itself. The ministry ought to be validated itself. And how is it validated? It's validated only by the power of God. The godly results it produces. You know, several years ago, I'll give you an example. I took my wife with me to a place that was very, very strict. It was in another country where I had preached before and God had really moved. And when we walked through the door, this woman came right up to me. You know, my wife, Chartle, she dresses very modestly, but she just dresses normal. That's it. I mean, she doesn't wear some religious garb. She just dresses normal. And this lady walked up and right in front of me, in front of my wife, said, "Brother Paul, you preach with such power of God on your life, and God uses you so much. How could you be married to a woman like this?" Now, the woman was a young woman, and she was actually quite attractive. It's just that she had made herself almost look haggard. And no makeup, she had a veil on and all sorts of things, and was just like this, just very bitter looking. And my wife, just with a smile and a twinkle in her eye, said, "Do you have a picture of you before you were a believer?" And the woman said, "Yes." Charles said, "I'd like to see it. Do you have it on you?" And, "Yes." "Okay, let me see it." And the lady opened up her purse and pulled out this picture, and here was this vibrant, beautiful girl smiling, a little bit of makeup on her face, nothing extravagant. And Charles looked at her and went like that, and she goes, "You know, I like you better as an unbeliever." And then she handed her a picture back and she said, "What has Jesus done for you?" She goes, "All I see is a mean-spirited, critical, haggard, joyless person standing before me. Is this what Jesus has done for you? And is this what Jesus is offering the world?" Now the whole point was this woman came proclaiming truth, but the truth had nothing but the truth, supposedly, that she was speaking had no positive effect whatsoever in her life. Another thing, a guy came to me a while back, and I love being here in Alabama, and I love this church, but I'm a very small church type guy. I love house churches. I love a very simple lifestyle, everything. But I love this church. And God's called me here. And some guy came up to me and he goes, basically what he said was, just right in my face, young guy, "You've compromised." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I go, "Okay, how?" And then, he pointed out that I actually have a truck. It's a Chevy Blazer that actually runs. I don't know how much longer it's going to run, but it runs. I have a normal house. And he just started going down through all these things. My clothes didn't have any holes in them like before, and all these different things. And I mean, he was nitpicking me apart. And I just listened. None of it had really a scriptural basis to it. And when he got done, I said, "Let me ask you a question. How's the discipleship with your wife going? And your children?" He goes, "Man, I'm really struggling in that area. I'll admit, I'm really struggling in that area." I said, "How dare you come to me and point out all the ways I've compromised when you don't have one scripture to back yourself up, and yet you stand there failing in regard to some of the greatest responsibilities God's given you?" Again, he's pointing out problems with me, and yet his own life is not validated by anything. You see? "Man, I don't like what that guy preaches. But I have to admit, no one's ever loved me like him. No one's ever served me like him. Man, the stuff he says about family to me is a little bit kooky, the head deacon says. I mean, it's just too extreme. And another deacon says, yeah, but have you ever seen a family like his? I mean, my goodness, look at just the way they seem to love each other. Well, I think that guy's just full of a bunch of hot air. Yeah, but he sure seems to fly a lot higher than we do. Do you see what I'm saying? It needs to be validated. If it's true, it's going to produce good fruit in your life. And don't be mean-spirited, and don't be overly religious. And I'll end on that. And what do I mean by overly religious? Several years ago, guys, I intimidated everybody all the time. I know I did. I mean, everybody be having a wonderful time, and then Paul Washer would walk in, who had been fasting for 683 days and hadn't drank water in 20 months, and was at that moment memorizing the book of Romans sideways. Didn't crack a smile, didn't tell a joke, nothing. And everyone was intimidated until I realized that the whole thing was wrong. And you know what? Now a lot of times, and this is what's amazing, I just decided, look, I'm going to love the Lord, but I'm not going to try to be something. And I am most certainly no longer going to try to intimidate people. And you know what? I have found out when a lot of young zealots get to know me, they're disappointed now. They're disappointed. Because they want somebody like that. And they want to be like that. What I've discovered is something completely different. That I don't want to be anything more than a human being who has been a recipient of grace. I want to fast, and I want to go out when Ricky Young makes those ribs that he makes, and I want to eat as many as I can, and when my wife goes to the bathroom to change the diapers on my daughter, I want to scarf about 4 more. I want to laugh, and I just want to be a real human being, not some icon of false piety. When you go take a church, there needs to be some separation. They need to know you are a serious man of God. But as Carlton Allen told me one time, a missionary in Peru, he said, Paul, take your ministry very seriously. Do not take yourself seriously at all. And so don't try to be something other than human. Don't be mere men. Don't be carnal. But just be men touched by grace and walk among your congregation in that way.